For 9 seasons, one man walked into rivers most people wouldn't get within a mile of, hunting creatures that sounded like folklore until he pulled them out of the water and proved they were real. Then, in 2017, at the absolute height of its popularity, river monsters simply stopped. No dramatic finale, no scandal, no slow fade into cancellation. It just ended. And for years, the explanation fans got was almost too simple to believe. Jeremy Wade said he had run out of monsters. This is the real story of why that's actually true, why it's more remarkable than it sounds, and what Jeremy Wade has spent the years since actually trying to tell his audience. To understand why the ending of this show matters, you first have to understand that Jeremy Wade was never a television invention. He wasn't an actor cast to play an adventurer. Born in England in 1956, Wade studied zoology at Bristol University and trained as a biology teacher. And somewhere in there, he became fixated on a question most of the scientific establishment simply dismissed. Could freshwater fish actually be responsible for unexplained attacks on people? Sharks got the credit for that kind of violence. Saltwater predators got the documentaries. River fish were considered a non-starter. Wade didn't buy it, and for decades before a single camera ever followed him, he traveled to remote rivers on his own money to find out for himself. He spent years chasing the Goliath tigerfish through the Congo, a pursuit that reportedly stretched across roughly 25 years before he finally landed one large enough to prove the legend. He investigated the goonch catfish in India after reports of swimmers being pulled under. He tracked the arapaima, a fish that can grow past 10 feet long, through the Amazon. None of this was funded by a network. This was a man living out of tents, catching malaria multiple times, and absorbing risk most people would never sign up for, in pursuit of an obsession nobody was paying him to have. By the time Animal Planet approached him about turning that work into a television show in 2008, Wade was 52 years old and had already been doing this, essentially unknown to the world, for the better part of 3 decades. The show didn't create an adventurer, it pointed a camera at one. That's exactly why River Monsters felt different from every other nature program on television when it premiered in April 2009. It wasn't built around exotic scenery, it was built like a detective story. Wade would arrive somewhere following reports of attacks or disappearances, interview witnesses, examine the evidence, and use a combination of biology and fishing expertise to identify and catch the creature responsible. And because Wade genuinely knew this material, having lived it for decades before the cameras showed up, that authenticity came through. Within weeks, it became Animal Planet's most-watched show. By its 3rd season, it was drawing close to 1.5 million viewers per episode in the US alone, and airing in more than 200 countries. It introduced global audiences to the electric eel, the giant freshwater stingray, the Greenland shark, creatures that had spent their entire existence overshadowed by ocean predators, despite being every bit as strange and dangerous. So why did it end? The official explanation, delivered by Wade himself in a press statement at the time, was refreshingly blunt. Some shows can run forever, he said, but our subject matter is finite. In a separate interview, he put it even more directly. He had, in his own words, run out of monsters. On its face, that sounds almost too simple for a show this popular to walk away from voluntarily. But it's worth actually sitting with what that statement means, because it's a genuinely unusual thing for a television host to say. River Monsters was never built around a renewable premise. Wade wasn't investigating a new city crime each week. He was working through an actual, finite list, freshwater species around the world credibly linked to unexplained attacks or disappearances, that could sustain the show's specific detective story format. Over 9 seasons, he worked through the Goliath tigerfish, the bull shark, the electric eel, the giant stingray, the Wells catfish, the arapaima, and dozens of others across 6 continents. Each season meant pushing into more remote locations and more extreme circumstances to find a mystery that hadn't already been solved on camera. At a certain point, the format that made the show special, real investigation, real biology, real risk, real catches, started running up against a genuinely limited supply of credible mysteries left to chase. Wade choosing to end the show on his own terms at its peak, rather than stretching the format past what the real subject matter could support, is arguably the more disciplined and more interesting decision than most shows ever make. Most long-running television doesn't end because the person driving it decided the well was honestly dry. It ends because ratings collapsed, or a network pulled the plug, or a host simply got tired. Wade's version of events is the rarer one. A creator who set out to answer a specific set of real-world questions, and, having genuinely answered them, said so publicly, rather than manufacturing new mysteries to keep the format alive. That doesn't mean nothing else was going on underneath the surface, though. And this is where the story becomes genuinely more interesting than the tidy, "ran out of monsters" headline suggests. Because Wade wasn't simply visiting these rivers once for a television shoot and moving on. He'd been traveling to many of these same locations since the 1980s, decades before river monsters existed, which gave him a kind of long-term baseline knowledge about these ecosystems that almost nobody else filming nature television actually had. And what he was documenting over that span of decades, alongside the fish, was change. Freshwater ecologists have been sounding alarms about global river health for years, citing threats from damming, pollution, overfishing, and climate-driven drought. And Wade's own career put him in a genuinely unusual position to witness pieces of that firsthand, across multiple continents, over multiple decades. What's actually documented is what came next. After River Monsters ended in 2017, Wade didn't step away from television. He went on to host Mighty Rivers, premiering in 2018, along with Dark Waters and Mysteries of the Deep. And if you actually watch Mighty Rivers side by side with River Monsters, the shift in focus is obvious and deliberate. Where River Monsters was structured as a mystery and catch format, Mighty Rivers explicitly organized itself around major river systems and the specific environmental pressures threatening each one: deforestation and mining pressure on the Amazon, pollution and overpopulation along Asia's major rivers, the transformation of American waterways by agriculture and industry. It's the clearest on-record evidence that Wade's post-River Monsters work moved in a more explicitly conservation-focused direction, using his platform to talk directly about the state of these ecosystems, rather than folding that context into brief asides inside an adventure format. He's also written and spoken more broadly, in the years since, about his own evolving relationship to fishing and observation. His 2020 book, How to Think Like a Fish, is framed as a reflection on decades spent learning to read water, wildlife, and patience, the distillation, as its own publisher describes it, of a life spent fishing. It's not a tell-all about the end of River Monsters. It's something closer to a meditation on what 3 decades of paying close attention to rivers actually teaches a person, which, read a certain way, is its own quiet statement about how much he's actually seen change over that time. Here's what's genuinely worth taking away from all of this, without overstating claims that aren't actually on the record. Jeremy Wade ended one of the most popular nature shows in Animal Planet's history at its peak, by his own account, because the specific format required a genuinely finite supply of documented mystery attacks, and he had legitimately worked through it. That's not a small thing. Most television doesn't get to end on those terms. But it's also true that the man who made that decision had spent 30-plus years building an unusually intimate, long-term relationship with rivers most viewers only ever saw for 45 minutes at a time, and that his work afterward moved noticeably and verifiably toward telling more direct stories about what's happening to those same ecosystems. Whether you read that as him simply following his interests wherever they led, or as someone who felt the format of River Monsters increasingly couldn't hold the fuller picture he wanted to tell, the honest answer is probably some combination of both, and Wade himself hasn't drawn a hard, singular line connecting the two in any interview that's actually been verified. What he has done, consistently and on the record, is keep working. Multiple shows since 2017, a body of writing that keeps circling back to what decades on the water have taught him, and a documented shift toward programming that puts ecological pressure at the center of the story, rather than the margins. That's a real, traceable arc, even without needing to dress it up with invented confessions or dramatic scenes that never happened. A man spent 3 decades before television even found him, chasing down creatures nobody believed were dangerous, proved most of them were real, built the most popular nature show of its era doing it, and then walked away at the top, specifically because he'd genuinely run out of the mysteries that format was built to solve. That's not a manufactured ending. That's a career that actually completed the thing it set out to do, which is rarer on television than almost anything else you'll find. So if you're looking for the real reason River Monsters ended, it isn't a secret confession or a hidden scandal. It's a man who spent his entire adult life chasing something specific, finished chasing it, said so plainly, and then spent the years afterward pointing his camera at the bigger picture he'd been quietly watching the whole time. Sometimes the true story doesn't need embellishment to be worth telling. This one didn't.